Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're going to give it a few minutes so people can get logged in. All right, I'm seeing a critical mass of people joining us. Let's go ahead and get started. Thank you again for joining us. So today is the last session in our 5-part webinar series on Back to Basics, Affordable Housing Development 101. I'll post in the chat the link for past recordings. So if you want to watch the previous sessions, you can go ahead and see all the ones we did in the month of April. Today, we're covering how affordable housing developers manage construction and post-construction operations. And our speakers today come from Many Mansions, a nonprofit affordable housing developer in the SCAMP membership. We have Alex Russell, the COO and a former SCAMP board member and SCAMP board president, and Derek Wada, the director of real estate. So let's turn it over to Alex and Derek to get us started.
Great. Thanks, Jeanette, and good afternoon, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Alex Russell. I'm the COO at Many Mansions. And over the years, I've directly overseen Many Mansions real estate development, finance, asset management, and property management departments, which has given me a unique perspective on development, construction, and operations. As mentioned, with me here today is Derek Wada, our VP of real estate. Derek will focus on the construction aspects, and I'll cover the permanent conversion, property management, and asset management basics. So we have roughly 45 minutes or so to go over everything associated with 2 years of construction and 55 plus years of operations. So we have a lot to go through, so let's get started. Derek, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Alex, for the introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. Yes, this slide. As mentioned, my name is Derek Wada, and I'm the Vice President of Real Estate at Many Mansions. To begin, I'll be taking everyone through the construction loan closing process, and we'll be providing some helpful hints as you go through this wild adventure. At this point in the development cycle, you should have all of your funding committed, and you should have all of your environmental clearances completed. That's your CEQA and that's your NEPA clearances. We just closed the construction financing within weeks of each other on the 2 developments shown here. The top left is our Rancho Sierra Senior Apartments, and is actually the first modular multifamily development in the county of Ventura. And the bottom left render is our Vista Campanario, which includes a full spectrum of housing ranging from extremely low income households to first-time homebuyers. Thus, each of these projects and each of these closings had unique challenges, some of which we will discuss here today. People are often surprised that once you have secured all of your financing, it takes another 6 months to close the construction loans. The construction loan closing process is often the most labor intensive and quite possibly the most stressful aspects of the development process, because it requires, or it has, a number of checklists, a number of attorneys, and a number of loan documents, not to mention the very, very strict deadlines. For tax credit projects, you must close your construction financing within 180 days, sometimes 194 days, or you will lose the financing and the deal will essentially fall apart. Now, let's talk general contractor, GC, and let's talk insurance, because those are always fun topics to cover. The market for GCs is still really, really tight, and all of the affordable housing requirements, such as project labor agreements, prevailing wage, Section 3, NEVI-WEVI, strict accessibility, green standards, slow draw processes, these really limit the number of interested and, quite frankly, qualified general contractors, as well as interested and qualified subcontractors. It is because of all this that affordable housing is quite possibly 15 or sometimes 15 to 25% more than market rate developments. Now, when bidding for the general contractor, what we've done in the past is we typically pre-populate the GC contract with our required terms, like retention. We'll talk about the 10% retention in a couple slides later on, as well as we like to pre-populate the GC contract with markup on change orders. We've always used what's called a guaranteed maximum or GMAX contract versus a stip sum or stipulated sum or even lump sum contract. GMAX contracts allow for a little bit more control over the subcontractor pool, as well as overall cost containment. Timing, which is always a concern during these closings. Bidding out, hiring a GC typically takes around 6 or 7 weeks to put your bid package together, review the proposals, etc. Plus, it takes another 6 or 7 weeks for your lenders and your investors to review, to comment, and eventually approve your GC contract. Now, the other thing that is worth mentioning is in most cases, your lender and your investor will hire what's called a third-party cost reviewer. And this third-party cost reviewer will also want to review your GC contract, comment on your GC contract, and approve your GC contract. Again, all of this needs to take place during that 180, 194-day closing period. So start early. This does take a little bit of time. Insurance. I have also preferred on our developments, I also prefer using what's called the owner controlled insurance policies. And in the past, these OCIPs have actually made us money through what's called bid credits. Using OCIPs also provide better overall coverage, and you don't have to worry about subcontractors going out of business during the 10-year tail. Insurance, as of late, has become a hot topic, especially when it comes to builders' risk insurance. If you are thinking of doing modular, you'll want to engage your insurance broker early because the pool of builders' risk carriers is really, really limited. So again, if you're doing modular, make sure you're talking to your insurance broker early. And in fact, on our Rancho Sierra, the one that's on the top left here, we actually had to make builders' risk a post-closing item because there was no way we were able to get our builders' risk insurance in place at the time of closing. So other things to consider during the closing process. Hire, make sure you are staying in close communication with all of your vendors. This is your prevailing wage monitor. This is your environmental consultants. This is your CASP consultants, your deputy inspectors, and more recently, your bird surveyor. That's right. In our last several closings, we had to hire a bird surveyor to make sure that there are no endangered species on our sites and to ensure that there is no nesting occurring on our sites. Other things like working with your financial analyst to make sure that you are working towards what's called your closing projections. And what I've learned in the past during this closing process is you'll want to have what's called your closing or financial ongoing calls. This includes your lenders and your investors and your financial analyst, just to make sure that everyone is looking at the same set of financial projections. It is also during this time where you'll start drafting and finalizing the loan documents or agreements. There are typically 4, 5, sometimes more funding sources on these developments. And each of those sources have their own processes of drafting their documents, have their own checklists. And quite frankly, some of these documents could be hundreds of pages long. And so this is the reason why, just again, because there's so many parties involved, this is really the reason why most deals close their construction financing right before the tax credit deadline. So after all this fun stuff, after all this occurs, your construction loan closes, your investor enters the partnership, and finally you get the millions of dollars to start construction. Next slide, please, Alex. So now construction. Now that your loans have closed, it's really time to begin the fun stuff. For most people, construction is probably the most favorite part of the development process. For me, personally, I really enjoy the construction loan closings. Everything that I just talked about, personally, that's my favorite part of the developments. So, why is it so expensive? Construction costs is one of the hottest topics in the industry right now. This is primarily due to NIMBYism, prevailing wage, project labor agreements, and the complex funding sources. And all of these is really why affordable housing is so complicated, but also so expensive. Also, due to labor shortages, material cost escalation, there has been continuous and significant cost escalations over the years. The key to cost containment is to hire a good architect, develop thorough plans, consult with your construction manager, as well as your general contractor during the preliminary design phase, having standardized designs and finishes, and exploring alternative construction methodologies, pre-panelized systems, and yes, I'm even going to throw modular into this section. So what's the role of a project manager? Well, quite simply, our role as a project manager or owner's rep is to ensure the project remains on schedule, somewhat within budget, and really to ensure that the project meets all of the government and lender requirements. So one thing that I do want to point out here is during your tax credit applications, almost every application is going to require what's called a minimum construction standards form. And basically our role as project managers is to make sure that those minimum construction standards are in the plans and are being built accordingly. The other thing that you want to make sure as a project manager is that you are remaining in close communication with your various consultants. These are your lead consultants, your energy consultants, your Native American monitor consultants, and CASP. CASP, as of late, accessibility has become more and more important, and you'll need to make sure that the units are being built correctly. Otherwise, you could be putting the project at risk. Utilities, always a fun topic. And really the only thing here is as soon as you start construction, you are working with your various utility companies because utilities has a reputation of causing significant delays during the construction process. Pictured here is our La Guadalupe in Boyle Heights. And this project is roughly 20 to 30% construction complete at the moment. And this particular project has seen a number of obstacles, from historical artifacts to soils contamination. And yes, we even had a car crash take place, and that is what's pictured here. From my understanding, a couple months back, there was a shooting suspect who stole a car, drove through our construction fence into our ditch, damaging our cistern, us having to reorder the cistern, causing roughly about 6 weeks in additional delays. Next slide. So continuing with the construction process, draws. During this meeting, you'll have what's called weekly OAC meetings, or owner, architect, contractor meetings. Now, these OAC meetings typically take place either on site in your construction trailer, or nowadays via Zoom. Now, on our projects, we have the construction manager review all RFIs, all submittals, all change orders, all payment applications, because what I've always found is that a thorough review by someone like your CM who lives in the construction industry, a thorough review helps minimize the amount of potential change orders. Depending on the funding, you'll want to make sure that your requirements, like I mentioned before, like your your prevailing wage requirements, your Section 3, your project labor agreements, your DVBE requirements are being met. DVBE is specifically for veterans projects. We've hired monitors in the past to make sure that we are in compliance with these various agreements and requirements. Due to a complicated funding request process, numerous lender approvals, and getting funding released, finally, the GC typically has to wait 45 to 60 days to get paid. For example, we have had recent deals where it took 3 months for a draw to be processed and for us to be reimbursed from that draw. 3 months. As you can imagine, this puts a lot of pressure on the GC and on the subcontractors. Thus, it is important that the developer is remaining in close communication with the GC to ensure that there are no liens that take place during your construction process. 10% retention, that kind of goes without saying. That's pretty standard industry-wide, but the 10% retention is really to keep the GC and the subcontractors interested in the project through final completion. Insurance. So we've already talked about the funness of insurance, but in this particular slide, I kind of want to hone down on the performance and payment bonds, the PMP bond. This is something that is required, non-negotiable during your construction loan closing. And this is something that will and could take some time. You'll want to make sure that all of your lenders and all of your investors are listed on the PMP bond as additional obligees. This will just save time later on during that closing process, and this is huge. If you are doing modular, make sure that the factory has the ability and the capacity to issue the PMP bonds. This PMP bond, this created a lot of stress and a lot of heartache on our recent modular closing development that was pictured earlier in the slides. Next slide. So you have now seen the construction loan closing process, and now you have seen a glance at construction. Now let's talk about what happens after construction completion. And this is the transition to property management, asset management, and services. At least 6 months, if not more, at least 6 months prior to construction completion, there should be what's called transition team meetings between real estate, between property management, asset management, services, and finance, as each of these departments play an important role in the ongoing operations of the property. These meetings usually take place monthly, and as construction kind of gets closer to completion, they'll increase frequently or increase its frequency kind of as needed basis. The transition plan involves pretty much everything that's listed here. Finalizing your property management services plan, hiring staff, hiring your vendors like your landscaper, your trash company, those types of vendors, turning on utilities, that's always fun. Your punch walks. Punch walks usually take place towards the tail end of construction. And really this is a time where your architect, your contractor, and the owner basically do a thorough examination of the property, of the units, to make sure that everything is in working condition, to make sure that the units are habitable. And in the past, what we've done is we've invited our property management, we've invited our asset management, we've even invited our IT to join us on these punch walks. Other things like substantial completion, your notice of completion, final completion, certificates of occupancy, all that good stuff is all part of the transition plan. Now, the one thing that I do want to add here, and Alex will go into it a little bit later on during his slides, is what we've done in the past is what's called a closeout binder or a closeout manual. So again, Alex will cover that during his slides. Let's see, next slide, please. So lease up and grand opening. This is always fun. When the property is in operation, when the project is either starting to lease up or has finished leasing up. And I do want to take a moment to pause on lease up because I think it is important, because this is something that we've started doing as an organization. And during this lease up process, we have always tried to make an effort to go out to the site, to the development, the day the residents get keys, and really meet and interact and talk with the future residents. Because at the end of the day, this is why we do what we do. This is why we do it for the community. And it's always good to just hear their stories and meet the future residents. Services and grand opening. As you can imagine, these developments typically take 5, 6, possibly longer years to complete. And the grand opening is really an opportunity to thank the various stakeholders, thank the community, thank your lenders and investors for their dedication, their patience, and really the support, because this is key. It really, you've heard this in the past, but it really does take a village to get these developments completed. And it's always good to celebrate these types of events and really thank everyone who has made this possible. So with that, I would like to ask Alex back to the stage to take us through the remaining slides.
Thank you, Derek. So although once the grand opening celebration is over, the project still has a long way to go before it's completed. You know, a project does not convert to permanent financing for at least 6 months after construction completion, and in most cases, much longer. And this is due to the requirement of having at least 3 consecutive months of stabilized occupancy and meeting all of the lender closing requirements. Thus, you need to actively work with your property management company to have the units ready to be leased up as soon as construction is completed. This is probably the most critical item for permanent conversion. You know, you want to give yourself extra time to lease up special needs populations, such as, you know, homeless and disabled veterans, and expect delays due to government agencies being short-staffed. You'll hear that throughout this presentation and throughout the industry that many of our partners, including ourselves, are short-staffed, and this just adds delays to each step of the process. Now, I want to make it clear that there's plenty of demand, and it's not an issue of having people to lease up these units. It really is just that government bureaucracy and making sure that you just do all the things that are necessary to lease up these complicated projects. I also want to point out that, due to the delays in lease up, if you're not careful, you can have what's called a negative adjuster or penalty with your tax credit investor. This is because you have certain milestones that you've committed to meeting. And part of that's when you're going to lease up the units. You have to lease up all of the units, each unit 100% leased up in order to meet the requirements of obtaining the tax credits. So you want to make sure you get those units leased up. Otherwise, you're going to have cost overruns due to permanent conversion delays. And in some cases, that can cause you to defer or even lose some of your developer fee, which is something no one wants. Also, just like the construction loan closing, there's extensive lender checklists for permanent loan conversion. And the slide above shows some of the many required items. Now, regarding government approvals, it's very common for a project to be issued what's called a temporary certificate of occupancy, where people can move in, but there's some remaining items that need to be completed before you get your final certificate of occupancy. And one of the lingering items that's common, especially in LA deals, is obtaining your final handicap or NAC accessibility approvals, which can take many, many months and can sometimes be costly. So you want to make sure you pay attention to that, get your CASP consultant out during the construction process, during each stage, and make sure that you're staying on top of any updates or repairs that are requested. You also need to get a final survey to show where all the site improvements and buildings are located, insurance, which is a major challenge and a theme as you've heard so far, and I'll talk a little bit more about that during asset management. You also need to pay your final retention payment to the GC and get all your unconditional lien releases, and that can take some time. You also need to work with your finance department and your CPA to get your cost audit. And this often takes a while because you can't get that completed until your GC is paid, until all your major bills have been paid, and you're getting closer to the project being finished. We also commit to many things during the financing period of the project, and a lot of those require that you have certifications, handicap accessibility, prevailing wages, Section 3 or MIBI-WIBI, which are some of your federal overlays for hiring lower income workers or minority or women business enterprises. We also have green certifications in most of these projects, LEED, Greenpoint certified, et cetera, and those need to be certified before you can convert your permanent financing. Then finally, all your permanent loan documents will need to be reviewed and finalized. And just like during construction, this can take a while. You have many different lenders. These loan documents often can't be finalized until the extensive closing checklist items are completed. And so it always comes up right to the end and often extends your permanent conversion period. And again, well, not to criticize any agency, sometimes certain government agencies can take a while to get you those loan documents. So you want to make sure that you stay on top of that. You're in constant communication with your lenders and investors, and that you add a little bit of cushion in your permanent conversion period, because this can take a while. So Derek kind of talked about this a little bit, simultaneously with the permanent conversion, one of the most important things a project manager can do is to create a comprehensive closeout manual. And this will include a summary of all lender requirements, the final as-built plans, all general contractor and subcontractor information and contact information, all final specifications, the fixtures, the floors, the paint colors, et cetera, all the warranties, the roof warranties, window warranties, et cetera, all the unique aspects of the project. If there's something that's atypical, you want to talk about that. You want to show where all the sewer cleanouts are, system controls for irrigation, et cetera, What we've done that I've found to be useful is sometimes we'll pay a little extra and have the GC do a video during the construction and as we do kind of the final walkthrough to show where those items are, to talk about any critical maintenance issues. We even done and hired a tagged photo system where it shows where critical plumbing and mechanical systems are in the foundation and the walls. That way, when you have to make major repairs, those things are easier to do. So those are just a few things if you have the resources that I recommend. You also want to include your permits, your C of O, your notice of completion, et cetera, because all of these things will come in handy in subsequent years, especially several years down the road if the person or persons who worked on the project is no longer with the organization or they just don't remember. Again, we own and operate these projects for 55 plus years, and so you really want to have a record of this critical time. You also create an operations manual that describes how to use your major building systems, a preventative maintenance plan. So you want to work closely with your property management and asset management departments on that. And that's basically just how to maintain the property and maintain your warranties. We've had properties in the past where we had some roof work done that kind of voided the warranty, or we voided a waterproofing warranty on the deck coating because we weren't doing the regularly recommended and scheduled coatings. So you want to make sure you stay on top of those things and really keep your warranties intact and avoid voiding them. You also want to create a capital plan, which is a list of all the items you want to do in the future. You know, oftentimes in these deals, you have to do value engineering and value engineer out things that maybe you want to add back later if you ever have a grant or a donation or a future funding award. So it's definitely worth keeping and putting together a capital plan. And then also one of the final development tasks is obtaining your 8609. And this is where the IRS essentially approves the delivery of the tax credits. You have to submit your placement service package to TCAC. You work again with your either your finance consultant or your CPA on that. But unfortunately, it can take a while to actually get that approval. Sometimes 9 months. We've had it take as long as a year before. And that's when the tax credit investor starts getting their tax credits and you get your final developer fee. So that's an important task. And so now that you can see, when you kind of stretch it out from the beginning, when you find a site all the way through 8609, it can take about 7 years or so for a project to be completed on the real estate staff side. And this shows the significant investment in staff time and resources that an affordable housing builder invests in these projects. Now, given that significant investment, we want to make sure that these properties are well maintained and perform as planned, which is essentially what asset management is all about. Also, due to the aging affordable housing stock and issues with Skid Row Housing Trust's implosion, many boards like mine are very concerned that something similar could happen to us. I know I've got very many questions about it. We've had to give presentations to our boards about what we've done and are doing to make sure that doesn't happen here. And a lot of that is those asset management functions that we have in place. I've personally experienced the significant benefits of having a strong asset management team. You know, I've been with Many Mansions a long time when our asset management department wasn't quite as robust. And more recently, when we've significantly invested in and professionalized that department, especially about 6 or 7 years ago. And during that time, we've actually reduced our operating expenses per unit per year by well over 15%. So there's a significant return on investment for having a strong asset management. From the development side, we've talked about this throughout this presentation. You know, we want to make sure that asset management, property management, et cetera, is involved early in the design process. They help you determine specifications, the type of flooring, countertops, et cetera, because they know what's worked well during the actual operations, what we should do and what we should avoid. You also want to get their input on value engineering. You know, while reducing costs is important, you know, not everything is apples to apples. And sometimes you can value engineer something out that saves you some money now, but costs you a lot more money in the future. So you really want to get asset management's feedback and property management's on your value engineering. In fact, we're continually updating our design standard guidelines. You want to make sure that they stay current with changes in, green technology and just general improvements in the industry. So update your material specifications book, which will really help with quality control and cost control. And again, as Derek talked about, this is extremely important in today's high construction cost environment. Asset management also plays a major role in lease up, the creation of the transition plan, and the permanent conversion. So make sure they're involved in all of those aspects. And another primary aspect of asset management is to monitor the fiscal health of the property. So they'll be involved in the budgeting and forecasting during operations, monitoring your reserve accounts, making sure that they're robust, monitoring your capital accounts, which is very important for tax credit deals nearing year 15. I know when I had my first year 15 deal, the property actually that's shown above, Villa Garcia, when we syndicated that several years ago, that had a $1 million, a negative dollar, $1 million negative capital account that we had to pay taxes on. And so that was a pretty significant cost and something that could have been avoided. And we now make sure we monitor those capital accounts. And I can go through a whole lecture on that another time, but make sure you work with your finance and your financial consultant to monitor those accounts and work with your investor to make sure you can minimize those accounts. You can essentially reallocate losses. You can have an early exit with your investor. There's other things you can do these days. Another recent issue that caught us a little off guard was actually, again, insurance. As we've talked about with the major fires of the last couple of years, several properties that we've had been reclassified as in high fire hazard zones. And the property that's actually pictured above, just a few months ago, we were not renewed on our hazard insurance. We went out to the market. We had over 70 different insurance carriers take a look. Many of them weren't interested for a variety of reasons. We finally got an insurance agency to take the project, but our insurance coverage not only went up 3 times, so we were paying a little over $100,000 a year for that insurance, now over $300,000 a year, which is a huge, huge issue for a project that's already in operations. Fortunately, that project has decent cash flow and has been maintained well, so we're able to manage it. That's something that's not sustainable. And so that's something that myself and many other organizations are trying to see if there's a legislative fix or something we can do on the insurance side, because many developers are facing that. Also, the asset management department monitors the physical health of the property. They reviews work order trends to make sure all the water heaters aren't going to go out or something like that. They want to look at inventory control to make sure we have the right equipment at the properties, are maintaining our preventative maintenance plan so we fix issues before they come catastrophic events. They also maintain the capital plans and look for opportunities for green upgrades. We've added solar to many of our projects, low flow fixtures, removed grass and put in drought tolerant landscaping. So there's a lot of things that you can do on the physical side. Asset managers also oversee the regulatory compliance, which is becoming increasingly important. These deals are becoming increasingly complicated with new funding sources and many different funding sources. And HCD is really cracking down on regulatory compliance and actually starting to issue negative points. We had a project that temporarily had negative points. It ended up being an oversight that we corrected with HCD, but it was concerning. And there was a recent HCD memo on negative points that I recommend people paying attention to. But you have to stay on top of your regulatory compliance. If you get negative points with HCD or any regulatory agency, you pretty much might as well not submit funding applications for future projects because you will not be competitive. So you really need to pay attention to this and make sure you have the right systems in place. Another thing that's important is most affordable housing projects have non-fully amortizing permanent loans, typically with 17-year fixed interest periods, but 35+ year amortization periods. And thus, when you get to that year 17 or 18, you have a balloon payment that's due. What we used to do is resyndicate projects. Several years ago, that's not really feasible anymore. That's where you get new tax credits, do a new major renovation, get new financing in place, and extend the affordability period. But again, because tax credits and bonds are so competitive these days, that's not really a viable option. Hopefully that will be again in the future because many of these deals need it. What we've done more recently is just traditional refinancing. We tried to do a HUD 223F refinancing a few years ago. Took over a year and we still didn't get our HUD approvals. So we actually decided to switch and do a traditional refinance with Chase. It was great. We were able to do some major renovations and extend the financing, but we weren't able to do as much as we wanted. And especially in this high interest rate environment, that too is becoming increasingly difficult to execute. So all of this really reinforces the need to conservatively underwrite your deals and from the very beginning, and to have healthy replacement reserves. You got to make sure that these properties have adequate reserves to care for themselves without needing to refinance or resyndicate. And finally, again, if you can take one thing away from this slide and this presentation, is to get your asset management department, your property management company, and your services team involved early, because they're going to be the ones who are operating these assets for the long term. And so you really want to make sure that they're involved. So that is 2 years of construction and 55 plus years of operations in a 40-minute nutshell. We know we covered a lot of information really quickly, so we have some time for questions and we'll take those now. But if you don't get a chance to ask your question or we can't answer it, feel free to contact Derek or myself. So with that, we'll open it up for questions.
Great. Thank you both so much. Derek, in the beginning, you mentioned that there was a modular multifamily housing project that you guys did. Could you talk about the cost difference between modular versus ground up?
You want to take that, Alex, or? Yeah.
No, I mean, the general gist is it's not cheaper. We think maybe it will be in the future, especially as technology improves and systems improve. But what we really see, at least what we've seen so far, and we think is going to come to fruition if everything keeps going the way it is that we'll save about a third of the construction time. So we were projecting about 18 months. We're underwriting it as about 18 months to finish construction, but we're anticipating it'll actually be done, best case scenario, 11 months. So we could see some significant time savings. But if you go into a modular deal, I would not budget for any cost savings at the moment.
Here's a question. You guys mentioned having property management, asset management, and IT staff involved in the punch walks. Are there other points earlier in the process where it would be beneficial to have PM, AM, and IT staff involved with the project? And if so, when do you think that would be ideal?
So Derek mentioned this, and me too in my slides. From the beginning, we get our construction manager and our GCs involved when we start really looking at a site. And we also start getting our asset management, property management, and services team involved in different aspects, right? From the very beginning, when we're designing a project, we want to get their feedback, especially as we start getting into the design development phase. We want to make sure that they're involved in the specifications and the design, and that our community rooms meet our residents' needs, that the materials meet our residents' needs. We don't get IT involved too much. We usually just get them involved for the kind of the Wi-Fi and the IT infrastructure for the employees and for the residents. But property and asset management, I recommend getting them involved, and services if you know your services provider. We do all of that in-house, so it's easier to get them involved early. So a lot of people vend out their property management and services, but if you know who that company is going to be, try to get them involved early.
So what are the barriers to lease up for special needs projects, especially given there is such a high demand for special needs homeless housing? Does use of CES save time and money when leasing up?
Yeah, I'll take that one too. So the barrier to kind of what we talked about is there is the demand. That has not been the issue. I mean, we've all seen our waiting list is thousands of people. We had to actually close our waiting list because we have so many households and not enough units, and we open it periodically. There is the demand. The CES is great. Will I say it's streamlined? No. It's actually one of the complicated reasons is you have multiple parties, right? So if you have Section 8 vouchers, you have to get referrals from the housing authority, right? You have to get referrals through the CES. If you have veterans, you have to get referrals and coordination through the VA. If you have other potential populations, maybe you have seniors, you're wanting to get maybe referrals through some of your senior agencies. You have all these different agencies that are sending people back and forth and back and forth, and it's complicated, and people drop out, they get confused. If you're homeless, you don't have a, you don't always, you kind of get lost in the shuffle of doing all this paperwork. We try our best to bring the services provider in early, bring our property management staff in early, make sure we affirmatively outreach with residents, because it is complicated and confusing. The process is, and so you want to make it as easy as possible. What we've tried to do too, and then sometimes these projects get delayed, right? We've all seen these projects having cost overruns and challenges in the market, and then keeping people interested is also a challenge, where you start the lease up process months before the unit's available, then your C of O gets delayed and they can't move in right away. So you're trying to stay engaged with the residents. What we found is it's just the most important thing you can do is get your services staff involved, your PM staff early, work closely with your referral agencies, meet regularly. One thing we've also found, especially with people that are homeless and disabled, we had a recent veterans project that was leasing up. We were able to use some of our resources to put people up in a motel or give them food vouchers or incentives to stay on the waiting list and to stay with us. And that was actually really beneficial. I think we kept around 30 people on our waiting list that probably would have fell off if we weren't able to do that. So those are a few things you can do, but again, it's not for lack of need. It's just the process is complicated, and there's no magic bullet to fixing that. We're all trying to kind of find solutions, but that's kind of a few things I'd recommend. Do you have anything you want to add to that, Derek?
Someone asked if you could elaborate about how utilities cause delays.
You want to take that one, Derek?
Sure. And it's really just, it's the challenge with these utility companies is just they take a long time to get out to the site and to install the infrastructure. That's really what it comes down to, is like everyone, they're busy, we're all busy, and this isn't a priority to most utility companies. As much of a priority it is to us in the community, it's not for these agencies. And so that's where the delay comes, is just we're low on the priority list, and they are not going to make any special accommodations for our project, affordable housing. And we just kind of have to wait and sit until our number is called. And that's really where the delay that I've seen comes into play, is just that.
But I do want to add that I know SCAMF and other agencies are working on a bill to kind of streamline the response from the utility companies. It wouldn't give affordable housing priority as it's currently drafted, even though it's something we would love. But that would basically kind of put some penalties in place if the utility companies don't get the necessary approvals and hookups, I think within 8 weeks. So that's, again, it's not finalized, but there is some legislative action to help expedite those approvals.
Can you explain what resyndication means?
Yeah, resyndication is when a property has tax credits already, low-income housing tax credits, and then kind of like refinancing, resyndication is the same thing, but you just get new tax credits. So with tax credits, there's a 15-year period where over 10 years, you actually get the tax credits delivered. Over the first 15 years, there's kind of what's called a recapture or compliance period, where if you don't do everything you said you're going to do, the tax credits could go away or at risk. After that year 15, a lot of times the investor has gotten everything they're going to get. They want to go away, and we're happy that if they do. And as part of that, you can resyndicate the project, get new tax credits, do a renovation, or other things that are beneficial to the project. And then you further extend out the affordability period. So it starts with 55 years, and then you've gone 15 years in or so, you now push out another 55 years. So basically just adds more tax credits and kind of starts the process over.
Another question is, when is the best time to acquire a construction loan? At the beginning or after 6 to 7 months into construction with some equity built into the project? How does the interest rate sort of vary in either scenario? And they're trying to understand when the permanent loan kicks in after the construction loan expires.
You want me to take it or do you want to take it, Derek? Okay, so essentially, you can't close your construction financing without the construction loan. Like the other soft lenders, the government agencies wouldn't let you. So you don't really have a choice to bring in the construction lender later. So typically what you do is usually once we get our tax credit award, if there is no tax credits, around 6 months before your construction closing, we'll have selected and gone out to bid. We usually go out to bid for our construction and permanent lenders and investors. So we'll have our financial consultants work with us. We put out a bid package saying we'd love to work with XYZ banks and ABC investors and lenders, and then they'll bid on the project. Now, some markets you get more appetite for bidding and some not as much, but we'll bid on it and then we'll pick what we think are the best construction lender and perm lender because they're not always the same. We like it when the construction lender and perm lender are the same and the investor. You can do that on 9% tax credit deals, but you can't on 4% deals. And so, we try to streamline it because otherwise you have all these attorneys and all these different checklists. And so it's just nicer to have fewer entities. But you do that, like I said, usually about 6 months before closing. You'll pick the construction lender and the terms. Perm conversion will happen after everything's built, after everything's occupied. You've shown that it's occupied for 3 straight months. You've done all your checklists. Then you close your permanent financing. Either the construction lender will stay in and you'll pay off their construction loan and keep in the perm part, or the new lender will come in and you'll just pay off everything from the construction lender. That's usually about 6 to 9 months after the project's built.
I have 2 questions that I kind of want to get to. The first being, what are some sustainability programs that affordable housing development are using and or organizations partnering with the affordable housing development sector?
Yeah, no, there's a lot of good ones, and I'll probably turn this over to you, Derek, because you've been doing a lot of our rebates and things with the team. So the green programs, there's LEED. Personally, we typically use Greenpoint rated. Is that right, Derek? Yeah, Greenpoint rated. Mainly because it's just cheaper to certify. It's kind of the same thing as LEED, but it's not as expensive to do all the certifications that are necessary. Some cities like LA require LEED in certain instances, but where we have a choice, we choose Greenpoint rated certification. We've done green communities once back in the day, but we typically use Greenpoint. A lot of times there's solar tax credits that you can do. That is a thing that can bring in some money, and then there's kind of a extensive list of rebate programs or solar programs that are out there. And I'll turn over to Derek because he knows those better than I do.
So the only 2 rebate programs that we've been using on our developments as of recent, one is called the BUILD program, BUILD program, and the other one is the California Energy Smart Homes program. So on a lot of our deals, a lot of our recent deals, those are the 2 rebate programs that we've been tapping into. The key thing is a lot of these rebate programs like BUILD is really pushing for all electric projects. So really that is the requirement, is usually a requirement for being accepted into the program. But it's really those 2 as of late.
And for us, we
Okay.
actually mainly do all electric buildings these days for indoor air quality, and you have to do solar anyway. And so we've kind of shifted to a all electric model for our properties.
So this is a perfect leeway into the next question regarding solar panels. So when building solar panels, is it challenging to get permission to operate permit from Southern California Edison?
Yes. I mean, it's always difficult. I mean, again, I don't think it's lack of desire from the utility companies who are great. It's just everyone's short-staffed in every industry. I mean, it just is. And so it just takes a while. And a lot of times, you got to work with a good solar company. And then sometimes it's your local jurisdiction. Some cities who are also understaffed. It's just hard to get the permitting on their end. It's not just SoCal Edison. You know, it's working with their solar company, getting the local permits as well. And so, you know, yeah, I don't really have any great advice other than, you know, work closely with your, your solar company, work closely with your jurisdiction, and like with all project management, just kind of proactively move things forward. You know, just can't let things sit.
There's a question here about how, as a developer, do you think about the costs associated with upgrading sidewalks, or if you're asked to, improve traffic lights or something like that? How does that factor into the operational costs of the building?
Usually it does, well, it depends on the offsite, right? Like sidewalks and usually other things you build and then turn over to the local jurisdiction who maintain. So if you build a traffic signal or something, we have not typically had to maintain those traffic signals. They've usually been turned over to the jurisdiction who does so. There's certain offsites that, if you know that you're ultimately responsible, and each city is a little different, right? So I don't want to say a blanket answer. But if you know that you're going to have to maintain it, then you want to make sure you factor that into your operating budget, and work with your asset management team and work with the the installer to get kind of a cost estimate of what those operational costs would be. So there is no kind of magic bullet. That's not been something we do significantly, and is not something that I've come across that's been sort of an operational budget bust. It's usually on the development side where we've had offsites that have cost millions and millions of dollars, and in some instances I think provided little community benefit, but that's something you have to negotiate on a deal by deal basis.
So going back to issues around accessibility, what are some lessons learned with NAC inspections that you may share, as this can be a source of delays? And what is your advice for everyone on the team to avoid? But could you first, Alex or Derek, explain what NAC means?
Yeah, so
what it stands for?
Yeah, so the long story short is, a couple years ago, well, I don't know how many, more than a couple, I guess now, City of LA got sued for handicap accessibility issues. And so now the city is essentially hired kind of third parties to make sure that these properties are fully handicap accessible and they're not going to have issues again, right? With any lawsuits or other government agencies such as HUD, such as the federal government. And so they have this kind of NAC inspections where they essentially come out through the construction period and at the end and have to say you've met all the handicap accessibility requirements. The challenge is a lot of it's open to interpretation of the inspector. And so they have rules, they do, it's just they're open to interpretation, or at least they do interpret them differently. And so all you can really do is bring in your CASP, which is your handicap accessibility consultant, early, like during your design phase, right? So during your pre-development, like similar to what you do with property management and asset management, you want to get them in from the very beginning. They're going to do their best to make sure you meet the requirements. They're going to come out and, inspect the property during construction to make sure you are continuing to meet those requirements. Sometimes you have to go back and make changes. The city will send out their inspector at certain points, and they're going to have a long list of changes typically that need to be fixed. And then you just work with your property management company and your CASP consultant to address them. So the advice I would give is have a robust contingency for handicap accessibility, because you are going to get dinged, especially if you're in LA. Like, it's just going to happen. I don't care who you bring on, how early you bring them on, it's going to happen. They're going to ding you on stuff. So just expect it, build it into your time schedule, bring it into your development budget, and plan accordingly. Other jurisdictions is much easier. I'll be honest, when we're building in other cities outside of LA, we don't have even close to the same handicap accessibility issues that we do. So, other jurisdictions might not have those issues.
Okay, well, thank you both. That wraps up our session. We're at 2:01. Thanks to everyone who stayed. Just a heads up, this is the end of our Back to Basics series. So thank you to Alex and Derek for finishing the series with us. I'll be sending out the recordings and slides from all of the workshops in this series. So keep an eye out for an email from me. And I hope everyone has a good rest of their afternoon.
Thank you all.